Do I smell pizza?
Yeah, dude.
That's tragic. Come on, let me show you how it's really supposed to look.
Yo, how's it going everybody? Chadley here, and welcome back to another New World video. In today's video, I just wanted to share exactly what I have been running for my Fire Staff setup, just so you guys have an idea of what to expect from this build in the full game. If you guys want to start working towards that right away, this video is really going to help you guys out with that. Now, this is nowhere near a completed build. I'm missing so many things in this game. We don't even have any legendaries. I don't even have up-to-date gear. I just hit level 60 last night, so I'm still on the way to getting better and better gear. But it's all getting reset in a day and a half anyway, so it really doesn't matter. I just want to share the kind of baseline of this build. But for this video, we're just going to go through the skills on the Fire Staff that I'm using, how I actually use the weapon, and also the secondaries that I usually run with it, depending on my scenarios. Also tonight on Twitch, we're going to be in 1, possibly 2 wars, so if that sounds fun and you guys want to see the Fire Staff in action, hopefully I will see you over on Twitch. Also, if you're a hardcore player and have any interest in joining up on our company for the full release, make sure you join up on the Discord and put something in the company application section, and hopefully I'll see you guys in the company. But without further ado, let's go ahead and jump fully into this Fire Staff setup. So right here is my completed level 20 Fire Staff. I really do think this is pretty much the best setup that you can use. Meteor Shower is not very good. I'm not a huge fan of Flamethrower. Also, I don't really use Incinerate too much. I really do think these 3 skills are the best at the current moment for the Fire Staff. Otherwise, as you guys are leveling in the full game, I highly recommend just picking up Fireball and Pillar of Fire, and then otherwise just focusing on all of these passives, because these passives are really good, and then get all the way down to Runes of Helios, and then that right there is just a ton of extra damage when that's on the ground. So most likely what my plan is going to be is I'll grab Pillar of Fire as my first ability, and then get Spell Focus, Fiery Restoration, Clear Mind, Fireball, and then Clear Casting, Spell Slinger, and then I think the most important thing is going to be Flare. Heavy attacks no longer consume mana. That way we can just always be attacking. I remember early game when using the Fire Staff, there's a lot of times I could not attack because I was out of mana. This is going to help out a ton. It's always going to make sure that I can put out some sort of DPS, and I'm not just sitting there waiting for mana to come back or have to use mana potions or anything along those lines. Going full crit with the setup is just so good. The Fire Staff hits so hard when you crit, and it crits very often. It's what it's all about. You guys are going to be heavy attacking constantly. I almost never use light attacks unless an enemy's like 1 HP, and I just need to get that second cast off very quickly. Otherwise, it's constant heavy attacks. And then once I complete the Fire Mage tree, as you guys see here, I'm going to go into Pyromancer. I'm going to grab Pyromania, let it burn, and then finally max out Burnout, and that will be the end of the Fire Staff. And like I said, I really do think this is one of the best setups that you could possibly be running with the Fire Staff. It's really good for PvE, it's really good for PvP. Overall, it does everything that you need it to. Otherwise, the secondary weapon that I'm probably going to be running 99% of the time is going to be a Life Staff. Maybe endgame I will be using a maxed out Great Axe for mainly PvP stuff, but it can also be using in PvE. It has a lot of utility that you can use on it, but overall, I think the Life Staff is going to be my go-to secondary. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this tree because we kind of went through this with our Life Staff video, but otherwise, Sacred Ground, Orb of Protection, and Beacon are going to be my 3 abilities. I'm going to focus on getting as much healing as possible. The last thing that I'm going to get is Orb of Protection. It's going to do the least for us, and as you guys can see, once I hit level 20, I'm just going to max out Orb of Protection for the Fortify, Recovery, and just the utility of it. But the main 2 things that you guys are going to want to focus on is Sacred Ground and Beacon. By far your best 2 healing options. You can stack them, and they just work.
All right, say it plugs it in. Perfect. We'll start the car. I need a tap to begin the scan.
Alright, let's go ahead and get into some things here. Seth here, everyone, and I'm here to bring you some perspective from the Fire Staff point of view. I leveled up to 60 as Mage. I played Fire Staff and Ice Gauntlet respectively, and in this particular topic we're going to talk about the Fire Staff, its abilities, what I found to be effective at max level while leveling up, and also in 50 versus 50 wars, one-on-one duels, and all that type of stuff. So first and foremost, Fire Staff, as you know, you've probably seen a million guides out there, scales off of intelligence. However, you do want to look at some of the advantages of hitting breakpoints in intelligence. Some of them are very minor, like, okay, you get more light and heavy damage, you get more crit. But there is a particular important one, and it's this, plus 10 mana after a dodge. And so this comes at 200 intelligence. It is a very important and crucial mechanic to playing Fire Staff well, or any mage weapon for that example. And here's why. I will cast Fireball and Incinerate, as well as Burn Out. And that's my 3 skills, and as you can see, I'm very low on mana. So what happens is, every time I dodge, I get 10 mana. So I'm gonna dodge, boom, mana goes up 10. I'm gonna dodge again, mana goes up 10, and I'm gonna dodge one final time, and I will gain mana once again. So that will allow me to use my abilities. There are a few tips and tricks into doing this that I will probably show in a general video, but if you dodge in general, you can do some weapon swapping mechanics, and you can kind of generate that mana a lot faster, as well as keep your momentum speed while dodging. So once again, I'll cover that in a general PvP video. So since we have this mana mechanic to play around with intelligence, the other abilities just generally help you do more damage to a target at full health, or damage in general over time, yada yada. It's not a big consequence. So the next thing we want to take a look at is the abilities. We'll just look at the basic abilities here. Everyone knows what Pillar of Fire is. It's a basic flame strike move. It's very similar to this ice one here I have here, except for this circle is much smaller. So it's a skill shot. You know, you have to kind of aim it right, but it does do a significant amount of damage. What people are not aware of is that Pillar of Fire actually hits 2 times if you hit them with the outer edge of the circle. So what do I mean by that? If this is the Pillar of Fire and the tree is the enemy, if you hit them dead in the center, you will hit them 1 time. If you hit them off to the side like this and the area is still covering the tree, they will get hit 2 times. So it doesn't state this on the skill, which it definitely should, so developers, please look into fixing that, but it will hit twice, so that makes Pillar of Fire a lot better move. The next move we have is Meteor Shower. I do not like this one personally. The only reason is that from where my Ice Pylon is to where I am is like the max range of Meteor Shower. So you really cannot be far at all. That's about 10 meters maybe, something like that. And what tends to happen is, you know, you're sitting here channeling your Firestorm like Gandalf or something, and everyone just comes and beats on you. And there is grit to the meteor. However, I don't know if standing still in the middle of a war and channeling some AoE spell is the way to go. I think there's much better options for the mage. So going back to that, you have your first staple, and in my opinion, the best move in the fire tree, which is Fireball. It just throws a lobbed, it's got weight to it. For example, like when you throw this, you see you have to arc it a bit and it will go quite far. So if I were to tilt my camera angle all the way up, I could lob it quite some distance. So just keep in mind that there is a drop off for it. It does damage in an area when it lands. It does damage for direct hit impact, but the direct hit and the area damage do not double up. So like if you hit somebody directly with the Fireball, they are going to take that damage and that's it. Now the area around the Fireball is important because when it lands, it will burn for weapon damage, and the weapon damage does a lot. So if you get the second talent, you're going to get 9 seconds on it, which is going to allow that burning field to tick for 10% weapon damage each second, which, as you can imagine, is like hitting them a second time. It's a whole 100% weapon damage if they stay in the fire. Now, no one enemy is probably going to land and stay in that fire for the full 10 seconds. However, what happens in wars is you throw it into an area, you hit a lot of people, and generally those tanks tend to reside in that same area because they're trying to push a choke or a flag, and so they will end up taking burn damage. New people will enter, you know, it'll just kind of scale. So it does really well. It's a very nice move. The next move that we have, and one of my personal favorites, is Incinerate. So what this does is it puts a ring of fire around you like this, and you will push people back that are in that ring. They will take damage, and they will also be caught on fire. Some of the talents for this one include the ability to heal from that damage. It hits a second time, it lasts longer and puts more burning on them. So all in all, this is a great one to have, and this flows into a dive mage build, which is the one that I'm currently running. It's essentially a tanky mage heavy dive build. I know a lot of people in my guild, like Stephen Ray G, and some other people are also running this similar build. There is definitely more than one style to play. I would say that playing with Pillar of Fire is acceptable too as a ranged damage dealer. I know Flip Fire from my guild was able to dish out quite a lot of damage as well in the last war with that one. But Incinerate does seem to be best for getting kills, like finishing the job, executing people. So that is one good thing to keep in mind. The other skill is Flamethrower. You can read the tooltip and everything, but essentially you just channel some sort of a spell in front of you and you blow like fire out, and you seem to kind of move a little bit slower while you're doing that. It's interruptible, so if you get hit with pretty much anything, it's going to cancel that flamethrower and you're going to have to start it again. So I didn't like this one, the feel of it. Maybe in a situation where you have a lot of tanks in front of you and you can just flamethrower behind them and just shoot freely, it might be good, but generally I don't think it's like a playmaker move. It's not something that's good for one-on-one. Yeah, so we can probably discount this one for the most part. It could be interesting in a PvE build, but it does drain your mana quite heavily, so at some point you're going to have to stop doing the flamethrower and use your dodge to get that mana back or generate it from some other way. The last move is called Burnout, and the final talent gives it 50% further distance. It also lowers your cooldowns when you talent for it whenever you charge through something, but this is a really good ability.
Up to $1 million. That's how much University of Phoenix.
How's it going, everyone? Suffer here once again, and I'm going to bring you the kind of feedback and perspective of the Ice Gauntlet. I did a previous video on the Fire Staff, so please take a look at that, as it will most likely be paired with the Ice Gauntlet as your typical mage build. So with that being said, let's go ahead and dive into it. The attributes play an important part, just like the Fire Staff. A lot of these milestones in intelligence just give general damage, but one thing to watch out for is at 200 points, you get 10 mana after a dodge roll. So as you can see here, I'm going to use a couple abilities, and lo and behold, I've done 3 and I'm almost out of mana. So how do I get that back? There are some skills that generate mana, however that 200 point threshold is really big. Watch, I dodge, I get 10 mana. I dodge again, I get another 10 mana. And I can keep doing this process over and over. So playing around the dodge, 10 mana after a dodge mechanic is something that all casters are going to have to get used to. There are some tips and tricks that you can do to dodging, like with the Fire Staff. In that video I showed it, but you can dodge and kind of weapon swap to get some movement speed and space your dodging and your stamina, but I'll go over a full mechanics overlook for mages video later, so be sure to check out for that one if you want all the tips and tricks that's going to make you into like one of the, a top PvPer. So back to the Ice Gauntlet, we play around this 10 mana dodge ability, and then we'll actually look at the skills here. And so what we'll do is we'll look at the abilities, the actual abilities, and any abilities that require some sort of mechanical understanding of it. I'm not going to cover abilities like you do more crit damage when you hit with a frost spell, because that's very obvious. Everyone knows these are going to be good abilities. You're going to take them no matter what. So once again, looking at the way Ice Gauntlet plays and how it feels versus just a particular talent build. So we'll dive in here. Wind Chill, this is ability that you channel in front of you. It pushes people back and does damage. It takes 3 seconds to channel. The damage is not very high. So unless that changes from the beta, I probably would not recommend taking this ability. None of the sub-talents for it do anything in particular, so it just kind of seems like a dead slot at the moment. You can try it and see how you feel on it, but for me it feels a little clunky and like you're stuck in place channeling some low damage spell, which is not ideal when you could doing something else that's more value. The next ability is going to be Ice Spikes. I had a lot of trouble with this one as well. It seems to shoot a pillar of ice in front of you to about like 8 meters, which would be right there. And the hard part about this is getting in that sweet spot range to hit somebody, which would be right here. And you also have to left click mouse button to erupt the spike while it's traveling on its trail in order to get maximum damage. If you do erupt it right on top of them, they will take the extra damage and some more damage from the split ability in the final tier of it, which makes it shoot out shards like to the right and left of 6 meters. So it can hit, it just seems to be very picky and not reliable. So in a high pressured situation like one-on-one, the odds of you being able to hit this ice spike is going to be really low. If you do hit it, it will hit hard, but I think personally there might be some better options, so we'll go over some of those first. Ice Storm would be the next ability. This is a fantastic ability. It does damage.
Our commitment to you is delivering the world's most advanced PC. Our passion for chasing performance and improvement.
Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. My name is Invin. Today I wanted to bring you guys some New World early game improvements that you need to know, and these are going to be really important things that you can optimize during your early to mid game stages, and some of them even spill into the late game as well because they're consistent throughout the entire course of the game, and they're going to be things that are going to help you in terms of progression, how you can actually get some nifty little extra storage early on in terms of the bags, which I'm going to cover, how to optimize your character to be the best it can be right from the start so that you can get through some of the early game content that can be more challenging at lower levels, and really just get ahead of the competition with all of these tips. So I'm going to jump straight into it here with the first one, and this is going to be to do with bags. Now with bags, you're going to need a minor rune of holding, and these are available from your faction vendor. Now I'm aware that you do get one bag from doing the quest, and this bag does give you plus 50 encumbrance, but what you can actually do once you get into the main town, whether it's Everfall, Windswood, wherever you are, you can go to your faction vendor, so whichever faction you've picked, the relevant vendor, you can go over there and trade with them for 1,000 faction points, and they are going to give you something called a minor rune of holding. Now this will mean that you can craft a bag that's got at least 100 encumbrance, so it's double as good as the one that you do get from the starting quest, which is going to be really, really useful. You can get this pretty early on because you only need to do around 4 or 5 faction missions to actually gain 1,000 points. At the moment, obviously those values could change when we go into open beta and full release, but roughly it's going to be fairly cheap in terms of the grand comparison of everything else, and you're going to be able to get a decent amount of holding out of this extra, which is going to save you coming back to town quite as often, particularly when you're gathering, trying to level up those gathering, refining and crafting skills early on in the game. Now also this bag can give you a perk, which is really, really nice. So you can either get a random roll perk from this, or you can indeed put on a crafting resource ingredient, whichever one you've got. If you've got a perk that you would like to put on, go ahead and throw that in. That can give you a specific thing, or like I said there, you can get a random one, and these can be anything like mining items way less when they're in the bag, or skinning items way less, or whatever the case may be. And like I said there, you get plus 100 encumbrance, or you can get even more than that depending on how lucky you get on the roll, but you can get anywhere from that to around 110 with just this one bag. So what you'll need to do is you'll need 45 coarse leather, which is refined raw hides, 25 linen, which is refined hemp, and 10 iron ingots, which is refined iron ore. Then that together with the minor rune of holding, go over to the outfitting station, scroll down to the bag section, and you'll be able to craft this bag. And it's a really, really good thing that can give you a huge advantage in terms of storage early game, so that you're not having to return to town quite as often, and when you do return to town, you've got a bigger yield from all of the activities that you've been doing, which is really, really nice. Now moving on to the second one here, this is going to be to do with optimizing your armor, and this is a really important point. Now a lot of you guys have been telling me in the comments, so thanks for the heads up on this one, that the values on the kind of the thresholds for being in light, medium and heavy are probably going to change into open beta and full launch release, which I would expect to be the case anyway, because it was a little bit ridiculous in the actual closed beta when we were able to get 4 pieces of heavy on and 1 medium, or 4 pieces of medium and 1 light, and still be in the lower category. So I think these values are likely to change, but what's not likely to change is the ability to at least mix and match some of the armor pieces. You might not be able to quite do 4, but I would expect 1 or 2 pieces to be able to be from a different set and still allow you to have the bonuses from the light armor set, for example. So the main thing here is going to be maximizing this out. Like I said, if you are planning to go for the light class, you want to put on as many pieces of medium or maybe a piece of heavy that will still keep you under that 30 weight threshold. Again, that could change for full release, so if it does, I'll bring you guys a video, but for now let's go off the closed beta values, which was 30. So 0 to 30 being light, so you want to go all the way up to 29.9 with that, and you will still be in the light category. Even if you're right touching the edge of that point, as long as you don't go into the 30, you're still in the light category there. And so you're going to want to make sure you make the most of this in open beta and release, regardless of whether they've changed the values. Just accumulate for that, so maybe you're only putting on 1 or 2 medium pieces, like I said there, as opposed to the 4, and that's going to give you a lot more resistances, particularly if you manage to be able to get a chest plate out of that. I don't know how they're going to rework it, so keep your eye on it, but definitely make sure you optimize your armor to get the most resistances while being in the desired weight category still as well. Now, another really important point is actually going to be to plan ahead with your choice of weapons, and it sounds fairly obvious, but there's a good reason for this, and there's several good reasons for this, to be honest. And the main thing is actually going to be that obviously you level up your weapon the more kills and damage that you do with this weapon, whether it be PvE or PvP. Both of these will level up your weapon the more damage and kills that you get with it. And whilst you probably change weapons throughout your whole time in Aeternum, the first few levels and the first weapons you select and try and use, you should try and get up to the max level, because it's going to give you a huge power spike when you get access to all of those active powers and also the passive powers on the trees, skill trees for these weapons, which are going to be super useful going into PvE or PvP fights. And not to mention the fact that you can then fine-tune your attribute points to reflect the weapons that you're using for it. So if you've got 2 strength scaling weapons, you're going into strength. If you've got 2 dexterity scaling weapons, dexterity, and so on. And this is going to make your early game much more efficient and make you very strong early game and mid game, and of course late game as well, if you manage to focus down on some of these weapons. So make sure you scale your attribute points correctly to base off of these, and make sure that you stick with some weapons early doors. Try and make a few builds or whatever, or maybe theory craft some ideas before you get into the game, or use the open beta as a trial period, because it's going to be really important to make sure you can get those passives and active skills really early on. Now, another thing here is going to be to make sure that you don't solely focus on leveling. Whilst getting to max level is, of course, desirable, everybody wants to get the first to be there. Okay, that's really cool and it's really good, except from talking about overall progression. If you are simply power leveling, then more power to you. Go for those power levels, do your town board quests or whatever the equivalent will come to be in the open beta that gets you the most XP. But in general, you want to focus on leveling up quickly, of course, because you want to be ahead of the competition. But from an end game perspective, you want to make sure that you've done most of the main story quests, if not all of them, up until level 60, as well as a lot of the side quests as well. The reason for this is sort of threefold, to be honest. One is obviously going into the lore. You're going to understand a lot more about the game, and there's a lot of exciting things coming up within the lore that I've managed to read into whilst looking into the lore pages from the closed beta. Lots of exciting things and hints to future content as well, so if you guys pay attention to the story, you'll see some of the zones that we might be getting in the future, little references to some boss fights that might be coming up, whether they're going to be part of expeditions or they're going to be open world, I don't know yet, but there's a ton of stuff, and obviously it will tell you a bit about how the game's working, the lore and the history of the island, and that will get the immersiveness of the game up a huge amount, which will make you enjoy the game a ton more. But even for those people that are not really focused on lore or not really interested in it, there is practical benefits to this, such as unlocking certain content by going through, like the expeditions which you need to do for the main quest. You'll unlock access to them, go through them at least once to see how you need to do them, and then obviously you can craft the keys to them from that point as well. But also, as well as this, you'll get a ton of gold from doing the main quests, and obviously XP. You will also get a load of great gear, whether it be armor or weapons, through doing the main story quests, and you will unlock access at those level 60 zones to those elite legendary quests, which are going to get you some really good weapons and some extra special things that I won't spoil all of for you guys, but you're definitely going to want to make sure that you're following the main story quest all the way through. Now, in the beta, obviously, we were capped to level 45. When you got to the Depths quest, you completed that one, and then the main story kind of fizzled out. But going into the main game, obviously, we'll have access to the full thing, and this is going to be really, really good. And throughout the entire story, a lot of you guys will probably experience the same thing as me. When you get to certain points, it says you can no longer continue the main story until you reach level 20, level 30, level 40, or whatever it is. And generally, that's a really good indicator that you are on track. And once you get to those points, by all means, go and power level through the town board, go and power level through faction quests, whatever you want to do. But I would definitely recommend sticking to the main story quest for that end game progression system, because when you get there, you will thank yourself for doing it. Not to mention that since the nerf to the town board, this is probably one of your best methods for getting XP, so definitely stick to doing those ones. Now, another really important point is going to be to not sleep on consumables, and this sounds fairly self-explanatory, but there's a reason for me saying this, and it's basically that food and potions are absolutely vital in New World, and they are going to allow you to complete a lot of content, whether it's PvE or PvP, that you probably wouldn't have been able to complete without that health potion, without the food, or without the stat boost foods as well, which is another really important thing. So making sure you level up your cooking and arcana skills are going to be really vital, and obviously that's to mean that you're going to be self-sufficient in terms of getting your own food, potions, and all of that good stuff. It also means that you can sell some of these if you want a good way to make money, and you manage to get up to tier 3 or 4 or even 5 foods fairly early doors in terms of the server status and life. Then you're going to be able to get a lot of these sold on the market, and tier 4 and 5 ones are going to sell even very late on into the game, once we're a few months down the line, even years down the line. These foods are still going to be the best and most sought after, so you being able to craft these is always going to be a steady, reliable moneymaker, as consumables are just that. They are consumed and then they're gone, so there's going to be needing to be a constant supply of these, particularly for people running that end game content and those PvP players as well. So it's going to be a really good moneymaker for the long term and short term. And finally as well, it also goes hand in hand with your camp, which is really good. The higher level or higher tier that you get your camp to, you can actually craft these foods and potions on the go, providing that you have the materials. So maybe if you're doing one of those elite zones, you're going through the area, you've grabbed quite a few ingredients, but you're running low on potions, you can put down your camp and you can craft those tier 3 or 4 potions depending what tier your camp is, and that will actually allow you to restock on the go, which is going to be a very valuable skill. And if you're the guy that's got the levels in the crafting skills and the tier upgraded camp, which I've got a video for, which will be linked on screen for you guys now if you haven't seen that, that'll teach you how to upgrade your camp to those higher tiers, and then you can be the one that everybody passes the resources to, craft up those potions, and you're going to be a vital player that a lot of people will want on their team. And not to mention, you're going to be very self-sufficient in any content that you do, so it's definitely worth having the ability to do that. Now, it's worth mentioning again, referring to those elite zones, that there is a lot of mobs that will drop potions, and the elite zones are going to be one of those things. So finally here, linking to my previous point about consumables, is actually going to be making use and taking advantage of the elite zones within New World.
Custom build PCs for any budget, any need, any power level. CLXA.
In this New World Beginner Guide, I'm going to give you a ton of information that will help you get off to the best possible.
What's up, guys? Vulcan here, and with New World's beta coming next week, I figured now would be an awesome time to put together a massive guide to help anyone interested in the game learn more about it. And this is one of the most comprehensive guides that I've ever put together. So I hope you guys really enjoy it, and please use the timestamps below to find what you're looking for. So to get things started, let's talk about some general info about New World. So one, the beta begins on July 20th on Steam, and if you would like to access the beta, you do need to either pre-order to get access, and pre-ordering starts at $40, or you can try your chance at a key by signing up on the website. Now, if you were someone who pre-ordered for free back in 2016, which seems like an eternity ago, you'll get an email with a Steam key from Amazon to download the game. So the beta is going to run until August 2nd, which is about 2 weeks, and the official launch is August 31st, 2021. This one is fairly set in stone. Hopefully we don't see another delay. Now, I have linked the system requirements below for anyone who actually needs them, and a couple other kind of housekeeping items. There is no subscription fee to play New World. You just need to buy a box copy, and that's it. There will be a cash shop in the game, but after a lot of community pushback, New World removed things like experience boosters and other pay-to-win items, so it's just going to be skins and cosmetics for now. So let's talk about the game itself. So what is New World? Isn't it a PvP survival game? Well, not exactly. So New World is no longer that survival sandbox or PvP-centric MMO. It's now closer to a traditional MMO with a heavy emphasis on crafting, PvP warfare, exploration, and dungeon delving. It takes place on the supernatural island called Aeternum, and it's home to all kinds of weird creatures,
so that's
beasts,
how you
and
say
corruption.
it.
So
Aeternum.
they kind of got rid of the whole conquistador,
show more.
you know, we're going through and exploring the new world type of thing,
Where's the
and they focused
specs?
entirely on, here's this weird kind of mysterious island that we crash landed on, and there's all sorts of like magic and corruption and stuff that we need to discover. So moving away from the realism and moving a bit into more of a hybrid between realism mixed with kind of that dark magic. So the map itself is divided into 12 zones, and each of them can be claimed and captured by different factions. When a faction claims a territory, they will receive a special bonus that's faction-wide. We'll get into factions and those bonuses here in a little bit. Now, there are no mounts in the game. I know a lot of people were really looking forward to like horses and things like that. Those are not there. You will be running everywhere you go, so please get comfortable with running. And this is a fairly massive world, so you will be hoofing it pretty much everywhere. Now, there is a limited version of fast travel. You can either recall to your last inn, which is on a 1-hour cooldown timer, or you can use a currency known as Azoth to fast travel to any settlement that you've been to. So that's it for kind of the general overview and the game section itself. Let's go ahead and move into questing. So when it comes to leveling up to 60, you can do it in a combination of ways. There are faction missions, town projects, side missions, and the main story quests. Now, the main story quests are spread out across your journey to 60, and they won't always be right after one another, so you will need to do some leveling in between them. And this is where those other sources of experience will come from. So you have faction missions. Now, faction missions are opened up at level 10 when you first choose a faction to join. Like I said, we'll dive deeper into those individual factions here in a little bit, but these are quick tasks that will ask the player to do some simple things. And they're split into two categories. You have PvE and PvP. For your PvE tasks, you'll need to kill a certain amount of enemies, collect a number of trinkets, clear an area. For PvP, it's often traveling to another settlement, clearing an area, or gathering something, and you have to be opted into PvP for this, which is where the high risk, high reward comes from. Now, most of these are very quick to complete. They're very simple. It's just go kill 10 wolves, go gather 10 of these items. But these are often spread out and around the settlement that you pick them up in, so you'll be able to go out there, explore, gather some other things. And most of the time, the world is designed to sidetrack you. So you will be out there, you'll see a named boss, you'll see something happening, and it'll kind of pull you away from that. So these are quick to complete, but be aware you will get distracted. And once you complete these, they will reward you with experience as well as a faction currency that you can use to purchase faction-specific gear. Now, I personally like the look of the Covenant and the Syndicate, very kind of Plague Doctor and Witch Hunter looking. And then lastly, you have the Marauders, which are more soldiers. So another source of experience are the town projects, and these are found at the bulletin board near Town Hall. These are full of random tasks that are similar to faction quests, though these will contain things like crafting, gathering, and slaying, and you can complete these however you'd like to. If you have the money, you can really just go to the auction house and buy the crafted items or buy the materials and then quickly turn them in. At the end of the day, all that matters is you actually have the item in your inventory. And in terms of experience, this is the best way to level up outside of story missions. These are incredibly quick to complete, they give massive amounts of experience compared to faction missions, and they're constantly refreshing. And then we have side missions, and side missions can be found within each settlement. These are often linked to some form of side progression, whether it's leveling up your campsite or unlocking a new gear slot for your character. Then we have the main missions, and these main missions are your milestones within your leveling journey, and these will often come with some big unlock that's going to enhance your character. This can be a new weapon or gear slot, and like I mentioned earlier, these will be spread out as you level up, so you're going to need to do some grinding in between to help bridge them. So next, let's talk about gear. So when it comes to gear in New World, you're looking at a pretty standard arsenal. You have a slew of weapons to choose from that range in your typical kind of rainbow of rarities from common to legendary. And as items become more rare, they gain more affixes and bonuses, which makes them more powerful. Now, don't expect anything crazy like you'd find in an isometric action RPG, right? This isn't Diablo or Path of Exile, but still, these affixes will be things like increasing all void damage or causing you to reduce cooldowns whenever you deal damage. And in terms of slots for your character, you have 2 weapon slots, 5 armor slots, which are your helm, body, legs, gloves, and feet, 3 accessory slots, 3 bag slots, and a shield slot. Now, one kind of pro tip here, take off your shield when you aren't using your sword, it adds extra weight and it's going to push you into a heavier category, which affects your dodge roll and the bonus that you get from your weight category. So speaking of weight, when you wear armor, you have 3 different types to equip. You have light, medium, and heavy, and depending on how you mix these up, you're going to settle into the light, medium, or heavy weight category. And these are going to determine your dodge and your passive bonuses. So if you manage to stick into the light category, you're going to have a further dodge, you're actually going to roll out of the way of things, and you're going to deal 20% increased damage, but you will take more damage. If you're in the medium category, you're going to deal 10% increased damage, and your debuffs will last 10% longer, but your dodge is only a short sidestep and not that roll. And if you're heavy, your dodge is a very slow sidestep, but you have the highest damage mitigation, and your block stability is increased by 15%, and the debuffs you apply last 20% longer. So as you can see, I mean, depending on the role that you want, you're going to need to adjust your gear to match. Now, this isn't set in stone, right? If you want to be a DPS that wears all heavy armor, then absolutely go ahead, but you need to know what bonuses are there, and that's something to keep in mind. Now, let's talk about the other type of weight that you're going to have to keep an eye on. So outside of armor weight, you also have inventory weight for crafting materials, inventory weapons, etc. And you're going to quickly fill up that space once you get going in the game. Believe me, you will very quickly fill it up. And along the way, you're going to unlock new bag slots for duffel bags and cases, and these are going to increase your carrying capacity. Now, it's important to keep an eye on your inventory weight because if you go over, you will become encumbered. You're going to move extremely slow, and it's going to cost way more resources to fast travel. And to avoid that whole encumbered situation, you can take advantage of the storage shed in each settlement. These are essentially your bank. They do have their own capacity, so you need to make sure to keep an eye on that as well. And another thing to note is that these are not linked. Each storage shed is completely separate from one another. So if you store something in Everfall, it will not be available in Monarch's Bluff. You'll need to load up and then fast travel to move things around. Yeah, but these storage sheds have a massive weight capacity at first, so you can throw pretty much everything in there and then go back and organize if you need to. Next, let's talk about progression. So when it comes to progressing in New World, we talked about questing and leveling up to the level cap of 60. But what do you get when you level up? Well, each level will give you 3 attribute points to spend in a variety of categories to help define your character. Now, these are important because they will directly influence your combat effectiveness with weapon types. So these combat attributes are Strength, which increases your damage with swords, axes, warhammers, and it slightly increases your damage with dexterity-based weapons. Then you have Dexterity, which is the opposite side, right? Yin and yang. And this one is going to increase the damage of rapiers, muskets, bows, spears, and slightly increase strength-based weapons. And then we have Intelligence, which increases the damage of your staves and your gauntlets. But Intelligence also increases the effectiveness of any magical perks that your weapons might have, like dealing fire or void damage. So this will be a good stat to invest in if your weapon has a ton of those procs. Next up is Focus, and this dictates your mana regeneration rate, but also increases your life staff effectiveness. So if you're someone who likes healing, Focus is where you want to go. And then lastly is Constitution. This increases your overall health pool, so if you want more health, dump all your points into this one. Now, all of these can be reset freely up until level 20, so you can get a good idea of what each one does and how they kind of affect the weapons that you like to use. However, after level 20, it's going to cost gold each time, and it does increase every time you reset. So you need to be more cognizant about what you're going to do with those points. So let's go ahead and move into combat, which is really where these attributes are going to benefit you the most. So the core of the game revolves around the new combat system in New World, and the direction they went with is different from most other MMOs out there. Combat is an action-based system where you need to manage stamina to block, use light attacks, heavy attacks, and skills, because this is not a tab target game. So as you're going out and you're kind of engaging in combat with different enemies, it's important to be able to time their attacks and not just spam your attacks, because you're going to be punished pretty quickly if you decide to do that. Now, don't get this confused, right? This is not a Dark Souls or some like crazy level of insanity where each fight feels like a boss battle and it takes forever, but it's definitely more interactive than World of Warcraft, where you can jump an enemy and nuke them down with a quick rotation. So just be cognizant that there is a little bit more engagement and interactivity to combat than those other games. So in between all of your light attacks and your heavy attacks are also your skills, and these are determined by your weapon type and what type of skills you chose to invest in with something called mastery points. We're going to get into these in just a moment, but first I want to talk about classes. So New World does feature a classless system where your class is defined by what type of armor and weapons you're using. So if you want to play a quick roguelike character, then wear light armor and use a hatchet or a rapier along with a bow. If you want to be the tank of the party, then wear heavy gear and use a sword and shield along with a great axe. You can easily swap between all of these weapons and become really kind of a dual threat. Now, there are tons of different ways to build your characters by equipping different gear for different strengths and weaknesses. And the nice thing is, New World offers a mastery system for weapons that gives players 2 skill trees per weapon to invest points into each time they level up their proficiency with that weapon type. And these trees are typically split into 2 playstyles. Some are split between PvP and PvE, others are split between dealing damage or healing, and you can split your points between these 2 trees or decide to go all in on one or the other. But at the end of the day, these will define how your character uses that weapon. And one plus here is that just like the combat attributes, you can reset these trees up until level 20, giving you enough time to experiment and find a pair that you really, really like. And right now in New World, there are 12 weapons that you have at your disposal. The Warhammer, the Great Axe, the Life Staff, the Fire Staff, the Sword, the Rapier, the Spear, the Hatchet or Throwing Axe, the Bow, the Musket, the Ice Gauntlet, and the Shield. And all of these can be paired up with any other weapon, so you can kind of not dual wield them, but equip 2 of them at one time with any other weapon.
Where'd my volume go?
That can only be used with the sword, and unfortunately there is no dual wielding in New World at this time. Also, there are no daggers, halberds, pistols, or wands, but we do have some screenshots with a few of these where they're seen, so maybe they'll be coming in a later content update, but right now those 12 are the only ones that we have in the game, and there are very few magic weapons. And next I want to dive into one of the biggest pieces of New World, and that's the faction systems. These are a huge part of the game, and they're going to be the first major decision that you have to make at level 10. Now, don't get anxiety just because I said these are a major decision. You can switch this choice every 120 days, and you'll be able to move factions if you need to. However, this is still a huge choice, because if you want to play with friends, you need to make sure that all of you pick the same faction. Otherwise, you're going to be opponents out in the world. You won't be able to enter the same forts. You'll be on different sides of a war, and that's going to be a problem, obviously. Now, there are 3 factions that you can choose from right now in New World. You have the Marauders, which are kind of the military-focused soldiers looking to dominate and control. You have the Covenant, which are the religious fanatics who do everything in the name of the light. And you have the Syndicate. The Syndicate are these secretive Illuminati-style faction that's all about subterfuge and deception. And the choice of a faction is huge because it's going to align you with that faction's efforts, like being able to take advantage of certain perks depending on what zone you control, or maybe a certain faction has strength in numbers and can easily win wars. These are all considerations to weigh in when choosing, especially if you're starting at the very beginning or if you come in extremely late. But honestly, a lot of people choose based on the look, and that's cool too. I mean, I know that I prefer Covenant and Syndicate over Marauders for that exact reason, but hey, it's personal preference, so pick the one that you most align with. Now, if you were to ask me what one of the most talked about features of New Worlds is besides factions, I would have crafting near the very top of my list. The crafting system that this game has come up with is just fantastic. It reminds me of old school RuneScape in a way. It's simple in the design, but it's deep in its execution and the range of things you can do. So for those people who are like me, who just, sometimes you just want to chill and kind of work on some trade skills like logging or mining, you can totally do that. I remember some great times when I was lobbying with some other players, just chatting about stuff, and I can totally see New World fishing hitting that same vibe. But anyway, so long story short, the gathering stuff is really laid back and fun to do, and the actual crafting portion is also very well laid out. So when you're creating items, you have all of your materials, but you can also add a special resource called Azoth to increase your chances of a higher rarity or crafting an item with a gem slot. And so you're probably asking, what type of trade skills are there? Well, in terms of gathering, you have mining, skinning, logging, fishing, and harvesting. Harvesting is for things like vegetables and hemp plants. Then in terms of refining, you have smelting, stone cutting, woodworking, tanning, and weaving. And then for the actual crafting portion, you have weaponsmithing, armoring, jewel crafting, engineering, arcana, cooking, and furnishing, which is furniture for your house. And yes, you can buy a house and it sets a fast travel location. They're expensive, and you can kind of deck it out the way you want to. So as you level up all of these crafting skills, you're going to gain access to better and more powerful recipes. So it's important to, at the very least, at the very bare minimum, do the ones that benefit your playstyle. But keep in mind, there is no limit to these. You don't have to specialize in one or two like you do in World of Warcraft. You can work on as many of these trade skills as you would like, and you can only focus on these. If you want to be someone who's just a crafter for their primary existence, that's great. You can do that. So that's one cool thing I really like about this, and I feel like it hits a really good balance between approachability and depth. So let's move into the last two categories, and that is PvP and PvE game modes. So for PvP, when New World was first announced, it was touted as a survival PvP sandbox. And then people were like, we don't like that. So then it moved to a PvP-centric MMO. And people were like, we don't like that either. So now it's just a normal MMO with completely opt-in PvP, no more full loot or anything like that. And this means that if you have PvP turned off, you cannot fight other players. But you can also not be ganked and you can't be griefed. So some people like this, some people don't, but they did implement some PvP modes to help make up for it. So the first one is the kind of bare minimum, and that's duels. These are your classic 1v1 showdown that can be declared at any time between two players, even on the same faction. Then we have Outpost Rush. So Outpost Rush is the most recently announced mode, and this sends 40 players to an island to take part in a 20 versus 20 match to control 3 outposts, gather resources, craft siege weapons, and kill bosses on the map for special buffs. It does look pretty fun, but we'll have to see what it actually plays like once the beta is here. Next up, we have the big spotlight PvP mode, and that's War. So when a faction loses control over a territory, it's pushed into a contested state. At this point, other factions can declare war for that territory. And this is a 100 versus 100 battle that will have the faction who controls the territory defend their fort while the opposing faction tries to take it from them. If they're able to take it, then they will own that zone and also reap its benefits. If the losing faction wants to retake that territory they just lost, then they will need to push the territory back into a contested state and declare war themselves, repeating the process. And then they also have to win the war. And this is going to be a regular thing for guilds and factions vying over the best zone buffs, so these are going to happen all the time. Now, wars are also scheduled, so this is something you'll go actually sign up for, and it'll be like Thursday, 1 o'clock, we're going to war. So this is not a random thing, and you can plan around it. And lastly, we have good old-fashioned open world PvP that simply requires 2 players from opposing factions both be in PvP mode and then just run into each other out in the world and decide it's time to duke it out. So this is the one that you'll most likely see all of the time, anywhere and everywhere, for those people who really, really like to PvP. So that wraps up the PvP modes. Let's move into the PvE mode. So when it comes to PvE offerings, New World was incredibly scarce during its last open beta, so much so that the devs took it back into alpha status to correct it. Now luckily what they've come up with looks much better than what they had a year ago, so let's go ahead and go through it. So their most recent addition is their version of dungeons called Expeditions. These are 5-man instances where you tackle traditional dungeon content. You have trash mobs, bosses, loot to collect, and right now there are 6 of these available at launch. Amrine Temple, Garden of Genesis, Lazarus Instrumentality, Dynasty Shipyard, Shattered Obelisk, and The Depths. Besides Expeditions, they also have the single offering that they had last year, which is still available, and this is the arena where players faced off against a single high-level boss called the Spriggan. And while this was a neat idea, the fight was very boring and devolved into a simple kite and DPS encounter, and it just wasn't good. It was incredibly boring. But they decided to kind of zhuzh this up a little bit, make it better, and these arenas are still hidden out in the world. There are multiple of them, and players will need to go out and find a key which allows them to enter. Once you enter the arena, that key is consumed and the battle immediately begins. So do not enter unless you're ready with your team, you're fully buffed up, and things are looking good. These are balanced towards groups of 5, and once you kill this Spriggan or whichever kind of arena boss is there, you have a chance at a legendary piece of gear. The next PvE event takes place out in the open world, and these are Corrupted Breaches. And these are going to open up all across a zone over time, and as you leave them out there, they're going to go from a minor breach to a major breach. And these are going to be guarded by corrupted enemies who are stronger than your normal wolf or your drowned, and these enemies are also shrouded in a mist that will slowly decrease your corruption resistance, which means you either need to have a resistance potion handy or be able to kite them out of the mist to avoid taking extra damage. These are geared towards 5 players, but the minor ones you can do solo, and they typically start around level 20 to 25. The last PvE mode we're going to talk about is one that we heard a lot about early on, and then suddenly nothing else was said, and these are invasions. So invasions are scheduled events that will take place with 50 players defending a fort against corrupted enemies from those breaches we just talked about. Players will need to craft siege weapons, use strategy, and fortify their teammates to hold off the army of creatures that are trying to break down the doors. If the creatures manage to win, the territory suffers and loses upgrades such as crafting stations and fort protections. So throughout the invasion, you're going to be dealing with a variety of enemies who focus on certain tasks. First up, you have the grunts, and these are going to swarm and attempt to take down players. They're weak individually, but very strong in groups, kind of like zombies. And then you have the raiders. Now, the raiders are tough infantry who focus on taking down as many players as possible, and they're very, very good at melee combat. Snipers are going to form the back line and deal damage to players from a distance, attempting to soften those defenses so the raiders and grunts can easily pick off wounded players. Bombers are just like they sound. They have bombs strapped to their back, they run at structures, and they blow themselves up to help crumble your fort. Then you have brutes. These are massive beasts who are purely looking to destroy any structure, but will attack players if they pull enough aggro. Lastly are bosses. Each invasion will have some bosses that will spawn, and some are going to be focused on destroying structures, others are going to be focused on killing players, so these will need to be taken down immediately. Now, if players manage to survive the time limit, they'll win the battle, they'll keep all of their upgrades, and they'll earn experience, currency, and loot. So guys, that wraps this one up, the kind of ultimate, massive starter guide, catch-up guide, however you want to call this thing, to New World. Hopefully there was some new stuff in there for you, and if you were out of the loop, I hope this helped really kind of catch you up. And guys, thank you so much for watching. Thanks for all the subscriptions lately and all the attention. I really appreciate it.
Let's see. Builds and everything you need to know. Let's check it out.
Albion Online is a sandbox MMORPG in which you write your own story.
Hi everyone, hope you're all doing well, and welcome back to another video on Amazon's New World. So when I was doing my beginner's guide last week, I did say that I would actually go on to cover each of the weapons, which builds I would use with them, and which perks I might recommend taking. Well, here we are. So I'm going to kind of broadly break this video down into 3 categories: tank builds, DPS builds, and, well, the healer class. Now, of course, this is by no means going to be a definitive guide. The fact that you can take 2 weapons, and in any combination, since there are no real sort of classes as such, means there are quite a few options and combinations you can pick from. You can also, of course, spec into what I'd call sort of a hybrid build, but you are going to lose some efficiency. And particularly if you're planning to get quite heavily involved in PvP, territory wars, you know, the guild war system, to be owning land in Aeternum, then it is probably going to put you at somewhat of a disadvantage. And just for clarity, I would kind of consider a hybrid build to be something like taking the sword and shield as a weapon, but stacking your attribute points in it into strength for damage, or, you know, a 50-50 split, rather than trying to focus on constitution to improve its tanking ability. I'm going to kick things off by running through the various DPS classes and some builds. And I guess we probably shouldn't even be calling them classes. Weapons would probably be more appropriate. But just before that, I wanted to briefly cover attribute points, because once you hit level 60, you're going to have 180 attribute points to spend. But you can expect to get at least as many again from gear, which is why getting the right gear can play such a huge part in the effectiveness of your build. It's also worth mentioning that basically, well, all of the attributes have a soft cap of 300. Beyond that, the extra points only make a very small difference, and there are no further perks to be gained. So generally, once you hit 300, that's the point you're going to be wanting to stop. And whilst we're touching on perks, yes, for every 50 points that you put into your attributes, you'll be getting a bonus perk. That's a bonus perk of 50, 100, 150, 200, 250, and 300. And yes, they stack. For example, Strength at 50 gives you increased damage to melee weapons light attack, as well as plus 10% increased minor speed. Then say at 250, you continue to get stamina regeneration while performing light and heavy attacks, and so on with all the other perks across up until 300. Now, in terms of how you are going to spend your attribute points, now I'm not going to give you an example of every possible combination of each class build, but instead I'm going to give you broad percentages of how I would aim to build a class. For example, if you are running a DPS class, then I would be looking to put around 75% of my attribute points into damage. So by that I mean strength, dexterity or intelligence, depending on if you're using melee weapons, ranged weapons or magic.
Yeah, if you're using ranged, you want to put all in dexterity. All. You'll probably put some in constitution, because apparently constitution is maybe intelligence. But yeah, constitution and dexterity for your range. You won't put any into intelligence or focus, and probably not strength either. And like for me, it'll be all intelligence with some constitution. If I do have weapons or armor that gives certain perks to focus, dexterity, or strength, that'll go up a little bit. But mainly, you want to just put your attribute points into what your style of attack is going to be.
Weapons scale off 2 attributes, but for now, just think of these 3 attributes as damage attributes, just relevant to the melee range or magic.
So you won't put some into this, some into that, some into that, because then at the end of the day, you're going to be weaker than you would be if it was just all where you needed it to be.
Kind of become a requirement, because it gives you some element of survivability, some element of buffer to keep yourself in the fight. And no DPS can just be an ultimate glass cannon, because you just don't really tend to survive enough. You don't get time for your team's healer to get to you and keep you in the fight. So for a tank though, I would basically completely flip this on its head, with 75% of my attribute points going straight into constitution.
And then the rest in strength.
This is what's going to give you a really good health pool to work with. It's going to allow you to it doesn't allow you to increase the threat, but it's going to allow you to draw the damage from the enemy bosses in the raids, in the fights, in the PvP battles, and tank that damage, and give your team's healer time to get you topped up and keep you in the game. And then I would only be putting, around the 25% into damage, because as a tank, you're not about damage, you're about absorbing damage. So your damage output really isn't that important. That's why I've gone so heavily focused towards constitution. Then finally, if you're going to be working as a healer, I think I'd be looking to go somewhere between 75 to 100% into focus. It depends slightly, in my opinion, on how involved in PvP and wars you are going to be. If you're just going to be running around doing PvE stuff, expedition, bosses,
probably 100%.
Then realistically, you probably can get away with 100% focus. You can really avoid all the damage and keep yourself out of the fight, so long as you've got a good tank in your group who's going to keep that
PvP,
keep that
if you're a
threat,
healer, you probably
should be okay.
75.
But in wars, things do get a little bit more difficult. That extra 25% into constitution can be really helpful in giving yourself sort of some element of buffer, particularly if the enemy team starts to focus you down.
In the beginning, there was light.
Anyway, that's enough talk about attribute points. Let's kick things off with the first weapon, and I want to start with the hatchet. A single-handed
Here you go,
axe
Bobby.
that
This is
actually
you.
fits in pretty well with a lot of other weapon builds, because not only does it have really good base damage, but with the Berserker Mastery Tree, it also has a significant amount of sustain and self-heal. The weapon itself scales primarily off strength, with dexterity as its secondary. This, at least in my opinion, makes it one of the few weapons that are very viable to work with as a ranged secondary weapon, because it has that high base damage. For example, you could run this with a musket. You'd spec your attribute points into dexterity.
You don't want to go
This would mean
musket
the
though.
Musket gets maximum damage, and whilst the hatchet would lose a little bit compared
as
to
of
if
right
it's
now,
scaled
at
off
least
strength,
with the beta
it
and
would still
everything,
be
the bow
a very
is the
effective
strongest
weapon.
range weapon.
It's also one of the few weapons that scales entirely off of one mastery tree, rather than a combination of the two, which most of the builds here we're going to look at do. And that tree is of course the Berserker tree. Yes, you're losing out on any of the hatchet's ranged ability, but the sustain you're going to be getting from Berserker is hugely useful in keeping yourself alive in both PvE and PvP fights. This, combined with the great burst damage, makes it a really viable weapon in my opinion. For attack combination, you're generally going to be wanting to activate Berserker from the off. I'd then be getting stuck in with a few light attacks before probably activating Feral Rush, particularly
now from what I've been reading though,
back at any point.
If you're gonna go more of a range route, you can use the throwing skill tree, and then just stick with Berserker and then your passives on this side. But definitely go down Berserker. But I'll look more into it so we can see.
Because remember, Feral Rush gives a 2-second route to enemies if you get a hit from behind. So if the opportunity to land that rear hit occurs, absolutely make it, because a 2-second route is hugely useful. And if you get that 2-second route, you can then follow up with the Raging Torrent for that huge amounts of burst damage. And that's really, for me, in that sort of combination, what makes the hatchet a very viable weapon, even though it has had quite a few nerfs from where it was in the alpha. Okay, so we have covered the hatchet, and I'm now going to move on to the musket.
Yeah,
Since
fuck
we've
the
talked
musket.
about the hatchet,
I'm going to skip
really
the musket.
hard. With everything, applies a 9-second. I'm going to try and hit, and maybe actually enough. I think that's what makes it work. Haven't actually yet used in the beta, but have previously enjoyed.
There we
well,
go.
with the musket out of the way, I want to move on to the
This is going to be what Kev is
a weapon I haven't actually yet used in the beta, but have previously enjoyed. It's capable of dealing pretty large amounts of damage in small bursts, yet also capable of locking enemies down with some of its debuffs. Interestingly, the spear actually primaries with dexterity, with strength as a secondary attribute. Abilities wise, I think I would be looking to make use of Vault Kick, Perforate and Sweep. You know, I'd be trying to use the Vault Kick to sort of stun and lock the enemies down, to then really allow me to get much closer in. And then I'd probably be trying to make use of Perforate to get the maximum damage against them, before then trying to follow up with Sweep to stop the enemies from actually being able to activate any of their abilities, stop them from being able to heal themselves, and then hopefully you can just get back onto the normal light and heavy attacks during everything else on cooldown, and hopefully by that point the enemy should be dead. The spear is probably a little bit more difficult to pick up than some of the other weapons we have in the game. When I first got my hands on it during the
Kev wants that spear.
Sometime last year, it certainly had me fairly confused, and yeah, picked up some pretty horrible footage of me playing it terribly. So it certainly is a class that can be a little bit difficult to learn initially. Next up, we have got the Ice Gauntlet, a weapon that was actually only very recently revealed and added into the game. But the Ice Gauntlet is very good for keeping objectives and punishing users who stay in one position for a prolonged period of time. Essentially, the Gauntlet puts the playing field in your hands.
Oh, this is the Ice Gauntlet. Alright, this is going to be my secondary weapon here.
Of attacks. The main abilities I'd probably be looking to recommend for Ice Gauntlet are going to be Pylon, Ice Storm, and Entombed. And as for how these are going to work in a combo, you ideally want to make sure you're getting your pylon placed down right at the start. And then you're basically trying to spend time avoiding the enemies, trying to prevent them from getting too close to you, because all the while whilst this is going on, the pylon is starting to shoot at the enemies. If, however, they do get too close to you, you can activate Ice Storm to slow them down and apply damage. All the while you're making use of these light and heavy attacks to continuously apply damage to the enemies as they're trying to catch up to you. If you then find yourself basically out of mana, or found yourself in a bad spot, you can then always activate your Entombed to regenerate your mana pool very quickly. It's also probably worth adding that the AoE of Ice Storm can be extremely effective in wars, where it can cover an objective and basically force groups of enemies off a certain point. It allows you to sort of control a zone of area and keep people from going on the spot that you don't want them to be in, which can make it such a valuable class during wars. I feel like the bow is a weapon that has kind of struggled slightly more recently in popularity. It's just not something that I've really been seeing that much used during the beta, but it can still be a hugely effective weapon in what it can do, and it's kind of like the ultimate fast-acting range DPS class, which can put out really good amounts of damage at range. Like the musket, the bow of course requires
and that's
arrows,
not even a high-level bow there.
In the case of the musket,
and he was going
if
off
you're
on
going to have
him.
this stuff in your inventory, always make sure you are stocked up. But for the mastery build, I'd be wanting to use the abilities of poison shot,
That damage is nasty.
evade shot, and penetrating shot. Essentially, with the exception of the evade shot, you are always trying to make use of these highly damaging abilities. If the enemies stay in one place or run out of stamina, you should be using poison shot and penetrating shot to punish them for their mistakes. But if they start to bear down on you or get too close, making use of evade shot is a great way of breaking contact and sort of putting some distance between yourself and the enemy. It's also worth remembering that poison shot does have an AoE effect, which can make it kind of effective against clusters of enemy. It can be a very effective weapon, the bow. You're also trying to make use of, regular light and heavy attacks, and obviously trying to land those headshots when you can. The rapier can make for an absolutely fantastic DPS weapon, as it has really high crit chance rates and some pretty gnarly bleed effects, which can take down enemies over time quite effectively, which means that, on paper at least, rapier can really be one of the most damaging weapons in the game.
Yeah, the
Like
rapier is a
spear,
really
rapier
good
actually
weapon.
primaries with dexterity, but instead has
Not for me though.
intelligence as a distance. You can
See
be
that
trying
fire
to
staff.
doing that really self and be fire staff.
Yeah,
Actually,
baby.
a weapon I have never used in
Here's
either
my
the beta
main.
or the alpha. So I had to go out and find some experts on this one to find out about the best builds for the fire staff. And more than likely, unless I've suddenly fell head over heels in love with it in the beta, I won't actually have any footage by the time this gets edited, because I do want to get this video out before the beta ends, so you're now probably just looking at the pass-through screen. But I hope it should still be very useful all the same. The fire staff is the hardest hitting magic weapon in the game so far. It has the high crit chance and can also make use of ranged or close-up attacks to burn its foes to death. In terms of mastery abilities though, I'd
Why does
probably
this guy
recommend
sound like the
Fireball,
narrator from
Incinerate,
National
or
Geographic?
Burnout. But it's worth bearing in mind that on this one, on the mastery, the
Around
passives
this
are
corner,
also really important.
run into
When in combat,
a group
should
of
generally
wild
be making
lions
use
on
of
the
heavy
plain.
attacks, as they're not going to be using mana with some of the passives selected in this build. And if the enemies do become too stationary, you can make use of Fireball to set them and the ground underneath them on fire and sort of build up some of that stacking damage. If they start to get too close to you, you can also make use of Incinerate or Burnout to drive them back, put some
Incinerate
distance
is
between them and yourself
trash.
before returning to the previous heavy attacks. I guess it's probably also worth mentioning that if you're a very heavy PvE focused player, then you may also consider Flamethrower, but I think it's generally considered that the above build is as a bit of a better all-round build. The healer is probably the most important class in the game, and the life staff is currently the only healing weapon available. If you and your group want to run expeditions, wars, invasions and world bosses, then you will be needing
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another video. Today I want to discuss how I landed on my two main weapons for the upcoming MMO New World on August 31st. I'm one of those people that struggles a lot with choosing a main class in MMOs. I play a ton of MMOs, but I'm also like that altaholic person that just likes to play every class and every scenario and every role just to experience it all and really take it all in. The downside with that playstyle, obviously, is that you don't get to enjoy endgame as well as other people because you're always switching and falling behind and all that. So I want to help you decide on what your main weapons are by talking about how I decided and the things that I learned about how the game works, and hopefully by the end of the video, you're able to decide on what your 2 main weapons will be for New World. So let's go. So these are the 11 weapons that New World will launch with. You have a magic category, a ranged weapons category, two-handed and one-handed for melee weapons. As the inventory works, you will have 2 weapon slots, a primary and a secondary, and then you can switch between them as much as you want. There's a little bit of a delay. There's an animation that plays when you switch out. And you can have 3 skills equipped on each one, and then when you switch, your hotkeys will switch to the new abilities that are on that weapon. And as you switch back and forth, you'll be able to use these in combat. So obviously you can't hit and then switch super fast, but you can switch fast enough.
Look at this open world. I love
on
to
top
see
of that, there is a
big group of people everywhere.
for each weapon, and you have to level this up to level 20 by using the weapon itself, and it's called Mastery. When you get enough Mastery, you level up, you get a new point to spend in your tree, and you can distribute these points, and eventually, if you get to the bottom of the tree, you unlock some very powerful bonuses and effects to make you very strong. So you're highly incentivized for picking 2 weapons and sticking with them until they're maxed, especially in a game that's very grindy like this, where everyone's going to be, you know, getting their hot pockets out and trying to level 24 hours a day and get as far ahead as they can, right? So you're going to want to pick 2 weapons that you want are your mainstay, depending on what you
I
want
get
to do
on.
in the game.
I'm big grinding.
Now you will be
hours
able
and
to pick
hours.
3 abilities from this. Of these 6 abilities, you see them as this square icon, and it'll fill these 3 ability slots for when you have the weapon out. You can pick and choose between the 6 and combo them together, and you can also, if you want to, learn extras and swap them in and out, and you'll have passives along the way that make the abilities stronger and affect them, and then you get passive effects that can make you stronger with using that weapon overall. Now, which 2 weapons you choose is based on a few different categories. The first is what kind of content you want to be doing. There is PvE in the game, there are dungeons, and there are open world events and things like that you can interact with and do PvE on. So if you're someone who is very PvE focused, there should be enough there for you to play with. And if that's the case, you want to think about what role you want to be part of. This is an open class type system in an MMO, so it's not as hard locked as we need specifically a tank, 3 damage dealers and a healer, but they've adjusted the game over the last year to be closer to that. So you actually do want someone that can take threat and aggro, hold down the boss. There's a lot of kiting that goes on in the PvE encounters and the dungeons that you run into, so it's good to have a tank. So if you're a tank through and through, the best seems to be the sword and shield. It is the only weapon in the game that you can use with a shield in your offhand, which gives you tons of defensive opportunities, a lot of passives for armor. You can shield bash and stun and CC, and you actually get lots of threat from blocking, I believe. So this is a great choice as your primary weapon for tanking. The next thing I'll suggest is that you run with 1 melee weapon or magic weapon and then 1 ranged weapon. The reason being is there are so many different encounters in this game of different types that if you're double melee only, you can get caught a lot where someone's just out of reach or a mob runs away from you and you can't chase it and you can't shoot it. And it actually, I think in many cases, unless you're intentionally going in double melee, it's very good to have a primary weapon that you love playing with, a melee weapon, and then you have an offhand like a bow or a musket or an ice gauntlet or a life staff that allows you to shoot projectiles, take down mobs, take down players, and especially when you get into the really big 50 versus 50 PvP encounters, if you're melee only, there's going to be certain times where you just can't engage because the mobs are so large that if you can't hit them from range, as soon as you go in, you're going to die. So I would recommend if you're just a casual player or you want, you know, the very like median experience in New World, pick a melee weapon that you really like.
I'm just kind of taking it all in.
Or decide on magic and then get an offhand that's a ranged weapon like the bow, the musket, or the ice gauntlet. You'll see tons of people run.
When it's information I haven't
they're a
taken it before,
with a bow in their offhand,
really listening and trying to
with a musket in their offhand. That way they
get
can,
it all,
you know,
do my
shoot from
brain.
range and then switch to melee back and forth. It makes the game the most I think the most simple and enjoyable way to play the game. But it doesn't mean you can't run double melee. I will be running double melee. My main will be rapier main with a spear offhand. But I'm also very weird. I like
it's
weird
very
things
strong.
and weird builds, so I'm pretty excited about running these 2 together.
That's very strong.
So pick if
but
you're going for the basic, go for.
He says 2 melee, but the spear is also a range because you can throw it. Which I forgot what Kevin is going exactly. What is Kevin going? Oh, he's going spear and hatchet. So you'll be bow and hatchet. He's gonna go spear and hatchet. So that'd be a pretty good combo. Can you not hear me, Bobby?
He says 2 melee.
No, you can hear me. All right, cool.
For a melee weapon and a ranged weapon in the offhand, and put that together. So you're gonna be able to run through all the skills online on websites, things like that. I'm not gonna go through all the skills here, just because I haven't really extensively played all the weapons. I've touched and used them all, but I haven't played them all very long. So you'll have to kind of figure that out for yourself. But let's talk about what the restrictions are and the things you're gonna want to think about when you're putting together your 2-weapon combo.
You can hear me,
Of this,
right?
Aside from aesthetic and experience with the weapon itself, is your attribute distribution. This is actually crucial for choosing what your weapon combo is going to be, because it scales your weapon damage into late game, but it also affects the passives that you get and how it affects your play style. So you'll see on the attributes page, we have strength, dexterity, intelligence, focus, and constitution. These all provide different benefits.
I'll be all
and then
intelligence
above
and
these,
constitution.
You'll see the weapon icons showing above specific stats. So the way that works is there are weapons that have a primary stat only, things like the Warhammer or the Great Axe. They scale with strength, which means the more points you put into strength, the harder these will hit and the better these will scale into late game. So obviously if you're going for a Great Axe or a Warhammer main weapon and you want to use that most of the time, and you just want to have like a bow in the offhand or a musket in the offhand just to poke at people that are too far away, pump that strength, get that strength up, and that will scale really nicely. This will help you determine what stats and what weapons you want to pick. On top of that, there are thresholds. For every 50 points you put into a stat, you get benefits that are themed to that stat more or less. So in the case of strength, after 50 points in strength, your light weapon attacks get 5% damage. Then at 100, you get 10% damage on heavy attacks. Then you start scaling up, you get stamina damage for melee weapons and light attacks. And it just keeps getting more and more melee focused. Stamina regen is faster while you're swinging a melee weapon, which is a crazy good perk. Light and heavy attacks and melee weapon gain grit, which is kind of complicated to explain, but let's just pretend that grit is a modifier that allows you to avoid being staggered when you're out of stamina. It's more complicated than that, but let's just pretend that that's what it is for now. You're gonna have these stat break points.
My PC just got into the preparing process.
You'll get about 190 points to distribute on your own by leveling.
So the next.
And then you'll be able to get more stats
What's
from
today?
here. I think it's probably safe to say that you're going to get about 500 points to distribute across these 5 categories on your own, and the fully capped amount is 300.
Yeah, it should be done being built by next Friday and shipped off, so I should be getting it hopefully 4th, 5th, or 6th.
Intelligence, dexterity, if you're running a life staff, maybe you want to run focus because you want to be a healer, things like that. Now, some of the weapons have a dual stat scaling. So the spear, the musket, the rapier, the sword and shield, and the hatchet are all hybridized weapons, which means they have 2 different stats they scale off of. The stat you see listed first is the primary stat. So for the hatchet specifically, it scales with strength and dexterity, but most of that comes from strength. So if you're a melee focused build with strength, hatchet's gonna scale off of that. But for every point you put in dexterity, you'll get a little bit more scaling on the hatchet. So it's important to know what that difference is. For the spear, the musket, and the rapier, these are dexterity based, so they will be dexterity primary, and then they'll the rapier and the musket are intelligence, and the spear is strength, and then the sword and shield gets strength primary and dexterity secondary. So
That's weird that the rapier is dexterity.
Figure out what your stat distribution is, what weapons you want,
It's very strange.
what talent trees are going to be, and how you put all together into a build. So that's what you're looking at here. So things you can run like a musket with a rapier, which are both dexterity main, run to dexterity, and maybe get a little bit of intelligence, and it scales off of that. So now that we know how all that works, let's go through some very basic build combinations, and I'll assume that for almost all of these, you're going to want to put together a primary weapon and a secondary with ranged and melee considered in mind. So let's go through some options, things you might like. I still recommend, if you're going to be playing a game for hundreds and hundreds of hours, you pick the thing you enjoy. Right, so find something that you like the aesthetic of. Maybe you've played it in beta if you got into the beta, and you on launch day you don't care about rushing. Play around with the weapons, pick the one you like, and then lock it down like this is the one I want to use the most because I really enjoy it. and then add a secondary to it, and you're good to go. That's the best way to do it. I will always suggest people go for their own happiness, but let's go through some combinations that can be really cool. If you're a PvE main, I would recommend the Sword and Shield with the Life Staff. The Life Staff is going to be the only weapon that can heal party members in PvE content like dungeons. So if you have the Life Staff as a secondary or even as a primary, you're able to do some really cool things with it. Heal people, buff people, protect people, channel heals into people, things like that. And then on the tanking side, as far as PvE master, Sword and Shield is probably going to be the best for that. So if you have Sword and Shield and Life Staff, that means you have ranged attacks from the Life Staff, because all of these shoot ranged attacks and projectiles, the magic weapons. So you'll have the ranged attacks for things that are far away. You'll have buffs and defenses from the Life Staff. Sword and Shield will be up close. If anything gets close to you, you can mess with it. It also has tons of buffs that allow you to stay tanky. You can.
I feel like this game's gonna take over.
All I care about is PvE, or I just want a very
my Call of Duty time.
That has all the things in it that I need, and I don't really have any glaring weaknesses. Sword and Shield plus Life Staff is going to do you wonders. Another popular build that you'll probably see if you watch any of the closed beta gameplay is Spear primary with a musket offhand. The reason this works so well is the Spear, one of the weapons I'm maining, which is super fun, but it has a lot of CC involved in it, like the thrust kick, incredible knockdown. You can do the sweep attack, which knocks down people as well and deals good damage. It's got good reach, so unlike things like the Sword and Shield or the Rapier, it can really hit from good range, and it's easy to land melee attacks with a spear. And on top of that, it just has some really cool passives and abilities on as well. And then you run with something like the musket. The bow you usually will have out for longer periods of time. The musket hits a little bit higher than the bow, but fires slower, and is usually something you can't really use while you're running around and being highly mobile. So the spear is your versatile weapon that gives you good reach, good mobility, a lot of CC, and then when something gets far away, you can pop them in the head with a musket and switch back and forth. You'll see a lot of the PvPers and grinders running spear musket. It's a tried and true combo. It works really well based on how the game is built right now. Now, if you're a PvPer, things to consider, because I'm a PvP main, I love PvPing. It's going to be hard to ignore specific weapons, namely the Ice Gauntlet and the Hatchet. Main reason, the Ice Gauntlet has super fast projectiles. It's very good for poke damage, very reliable. The base weapon itself, you can hit and poke people very easily. And then you have lots of abilities that are perfect for PvP. You have Ice Storm, where you can slow enemies in an area. You can bring down Ice Shower, which slows an area in front of you as well. And so the slowing, and you can kind of poke, and when they get close, you can slow them down and fight on top of them and switch back to your melee weapon. Ice Gauntlet is a great offhand, much like the bow, that you can pair with almost any melee weapon and get a lot of value out of it. The Hatchet is high damage, and it does have some ranged weapon benefits to it. You can throw it for extra damage, and you can also do some really cool debuffs and bleeds and things like that. Which is really cool. And actually there is a build where I've seen some people running Hatchet and Great Axe. It's double melee, but you do have the charge with this charge goes for 10 meters, and you drag the axe behind you, so you got some decent mobility. You have a Vortex, which is kind of like a soft CC. It pulls people in, and then the Hatchet gives you really good scaling and extra value on your weapon abilities, and then also you have the ranged attacks with it as well. But for PvP, I recommend something like Warhammer and Ice Gauntlet, Fire Staff and Ice Gauntlet if you want to get into the Fire Staff. The only downside of the Fire Staff is that it's a little slower and sometimes can be hard to use, but when you learn how to master it, it's super rewarding. And then you can run Hatchet with like a spear. You can run Hatchet with a bow or a musket. You can run Spear with a Hatchet as well, a double melee build, because these, you can throw the Spear and you can throw the Hatchet too, which gives you ranged options. Or if you just like to play super fast, you can run something like the Rapier with the bow, because they're both dexterity scaling weapons. The bow is primarily dexterity, and then the Rapier is dexterity and intelligence, but if you scale dexterity out, you'll get some cool dodge roll effects in here, and you can play really fast and mobile with these two together. So that's my big recommendation. Pick a weapon that you really like, and then add a secondary. If you don't have ranged, make sure you have ranged, and then think about your stat distribution as well. If you have a primary stat, you're going to want to get one of these to 300, and then think about which weapons scale off of that. So if you want to get strength to 300, think about maining one of these weapons here listed here. mostly these four because the spear is actually dexterity main. And then dexterity, if you want to do ranged, it works great with the bow and the musket. And then you can put in, you know, like a spear musket is really good. Rapier musket is pretty good. Hatchet and spear is really good. Things like that. So that's what I've learned about how the game works, how the stat distribution works, how the weapons are. I recommend having a melee and a ranged. I recommend playing what you really like, and try to pair that together with the stats that you have, and then get to grinding, because this game is a ton of fun. It's very grindy. You're going to want to pick two and stick with them. So I hope this video was useful for you. This isn't like an official guide or anything, just kind of my thoughts off the top of my head of what I've been working on and what I've been mulling over on what weapons to use. So if you enjoyed yourself today, leave a like down below. If not, that's cool too. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one.